Bono once fixed the flush on my downstairs loo.
Please, team.
Is that a euphemism?
Might be worth saying, Kimberley, for some of the younger viewers, Bono, of course, is the lead singer of Spandau Ballet. Sorry, you two.
I thought you were going to explain what a loo was.
And so what happened?
So we were on tour in Ireland.
And when are we talking about, Kimberley? What year would
this would have been like mid-2005-ish, I reckon.
OK.
And we were staying in these kind of, like, apartments, so it was the toilet downstairs in the apartment.
OK.
So basically, I went out to, like, the concierge type bit in the apartment block.
Bono wasn't working as the concierge, was he?
And Bono actually happened to be in the reception area at the same time. So I start shouting off that the loo's blocked. So then we start chatting, and then he's like, oh, sure, I'll fix the loo.
Was he wearing sunglasses?
Yeah, he always wears sunglasses.
That is him.
Is that it?
Always wears sunglasses.
So how exactly did Bono unblock that toilet?
So he lifts up, what's it called? The cistern. Fiddles around with that floaty thing, the ball cock, and he's like, Bob's your uncle. Life lesson learned from Bono. Brilliant.
Were all girls allowed in the same apartment?
No, we had two between us.
Who were you with?
I was with Cheryl.
So you and Cheryl, what, in a twin room?
No,
or do you have your
we
own
had
bedroom?
our own rooms. Don't get carried away.
If I was getting carried away, I would have said twin beds, I'd have said a double bed, wouldn't I? And trust me, I wouldn't have had in the background the idea that your toilet was blocked.
What are you thinking, Sam?
Oh, can I ask, being in, like, a famous pop group, is that just a roller coaster?
Yes, it is. It really
That's quite a very general question, Sam.
I think it's true. I think that it's not you in your highest moment, so I think to present this is really brave.
The bit I don't like is the concierge going, yes, I'll just sort that out for you. Wait a minute, I'll sort this out. Oh, it's right, Bono from U2 is going to do it, that's all right.
So what do you think? Is it the truth?
I think it's a lie.
All right, we'll go with lie.
OK, you're going to say it's a lie. Kimberley, was it a lie or was it actually the truth?
It was, of course, a lie.